Well, here we are for another edition of Upfront. I'm your host, Jim Claggett, here on Shaw TV, and my guest today is none other than the Mayor of Red Deer, Tara Veer. And Tara, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity, Jim.
Not a problem. Well, you know what? We're going to just jump right into questions.
Sounds great.
Right on the minds and right off the top of my head, green light cameras. And this is a question that came in through social media from Melissa. The green light cameras. Now, is there a plan to time the lights better than they are now so people aren't rushing to beat that green light in order to get to another one? And it's kind of a two-part question. The cameras themselves, what they're doing, and then what Melissa's question is.
And fair enough. So I'll answer from a couple perspectives. Through our annual policing plan, we have traffic safety as a priority because our hope is to reduce harm to Red Deer citizens. And we do know that we have challenges in terms of driver aggression, particularly at certain intersections. So in the interest of public safety, that's why we do enforce, even though we certainly recognize that there's differing public opinions on enforcement and the degree of enforcement and how we enforce. Speed on green came before council for decision as a financially efficient means of enforcing. So instead of paying another police officer or peace officer to sit there, we can actually use the existing boxes that are there with the red light cameras to enforce in terms of speed. I certainly hear, and we recognize that that was a new initiative, so we are allowing for an introductory period for the public so that there is public awareness out that. Instead of just implementing something new overnight, citizens do often express concern, particularly when they're unaware. So trying to bring some balance and respect in terms of using technology instead of having a staff person do that. With respect, we do have a couple of pilots underway with respect to timing the lights. One of Red Deer's challenges is that we've outgrown our old way of traffic system. So the traditional four-way stops or four-way intersections, we've really outgrown that. And we have the traffic volumes where we need to look at different types of solutions. So we do have pilots underway to change in terms of the timing. There are major corridors in the community where we recognize that people do feel frustrated, and I think that that's what your viewer is asking, is that people do get frustrated, so they'll comply with a couple lights, and then by the third or fourth one, then they're frustrated, so they speed to make the next light. So I think that that's a fair point. We're looking at efficient light timing. Our goal is traffic safety, and obviously if the system is frustrating our citizens, then that's something that we need to take very seriously so that they're not just speeding in order to catch the fourth or fifth light.
Perfect. All right. Well, we'll move on to another question. This again through social media, and Craig was asking with regards to advertising on the boards in the various arenas around the city, and maybe you could address that issue. Is it where that's at right now, how it works, and maybe where it's going in the future?
So I'll comment on both sponsorship and advertising in the community. And there's been a lot of public conversation about both sponsorship and advertising. Sponsorship and advertising are an effective means for different groups to get their messages out, but ultimately it saves on our public's tax dollars by using those private revenues in order to bring financial sustainability to city operations. We went through a review because, you know, on sponsorship, sometimes people would say, well, you sold that, you could have got more for that. And then on advertising, there's times where our public has said, well, actually, you're advertising a bit too much. And so there were some examples of that people can think of where they said, actually, our citizens told the city, you need to find the right balance. So council did an undertaking where we would review it, and we agreed upon which major facilities we would pursue major sponsorship dollars for. So the arena was an example where Service contributed $1 million towards the cost of that facility for the naming rights. But we put a sunset clause on that for 15 years because then that will be resold and the benefit coming back to the community. In terms of advertising, rink boards, bus wraps, those are all areas that those go out to advertising. Anyone is welcome to do that. There are terms and conditions for that, for the life of that. So we do have substantial advertising opportunities in recreation amenities and in places like the buses, but we do try to find the right balance for that so that there's not advertising on absolutely everything. So heritage infrastructure, for example, is one place where you won't see a lot of that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, right now, we did go to the streets, Bauer Place Shopping
That's
Center
great.
to be exact, to get some questions from some of the citizens here, and we'll go to one of those questions right now.
So if you had any question for the mayor of Red Deer, what would that question be?
My question would be, as the third largest city in Alberta, why don't we have an Olympic-sized swimming pool?
Okay, so that question had to deal with the age-old question that we've had in Red Deer about a swimming pool. What are your thoughts on that one?
So we have heard, like you named, the need for pool infrastructure in Red Deer. This council undertook we commissioned a citizen-led committee in order to do a complete review in terms of pool infrastructure in Red Deer. Because there was some uncertain questions in terms of the province with what they were going to do with Michener. There's been this long-standing community sentiment, particularly for competitive swimmers, about the need for a 50-meter pool, as well as the general community and in terms of the quality of the infrastructure on the outdoor pool. So we commissioned the citizen committee. They came back with recommendations for if and when Red Deer built the next pool, for what that should look like. And the vision that was established through that citizen committee was not just a 50-meter pool, but the need for aquatics amenities in general. So council received that plan for information. What our learning, though, is that if we were to build the pool that day, that was a couple years ago, it would have required 8% alone on the property tax increases in order to fund the capital as well as the operational component for that. Council felt that that would not be palatable, and that what we ultimately needed to do is go to consultation on all of the amenities in general, because there's substantial demand in the community for all kinds of recreation infrastructure, not just pools. So we went to the public. The public listed the top 20 priorities for the next 20 years. And then as a result of that plan, we established a capital savings plan. And the design of that capital savings plan is to plan for future growth and amenities to mitigate against that rate shock on the tax impact. Because obviously 8% in any given year without adding anything else would have been cost prohibitive for our community. So we established a capital savings plan so that we can methodically accommodate all of the priorities that Red Deerians have told us, but to do that in a financially sustainable way. And so the Aquatic Centre right now is in the capital plan for 2021 and 2022.
Okay, well, fair enough answer now. We've had a few questions, some good answers, obviously. We're going to take a little bit of a break, and we'll be right back with more on Upfront with Mayor Tara Veer. Well, welcome back. We're here on Upfront, here on Shaw TV with Mayor Tara Veer, the city of Red Deer. And another question that came through our social media, and it's something that's a lot of people are familiar with, and it comes from Cindy. And she talks about, well, the fact that spring has arrived. We're seeing an increase in number of camps from the homeless people in our city parks. Now, yes, it's federal and provincial is involved along with the municipal governments, but what is the city doing right now to address the homelessness in our city? And she seems to view it as somewhat Band-Aid solutions right now, but you might have a different viewpoint, I think.
So there is substantial conversations around this for a few reasons. I think even though social support services, and particularly shelter and affordable housing, are predominantly the jurisdictional mandates of the provincial and federal orders of government. Having said that, we all know that our citizens don't necessarily just want their local government to say, well, that's not our responsibility, and to just defer. Because we feel the impacts locally, and because we have an ethical responsibility to attend to the vulnerable, local governments across the country recognize that there is a role for us to play. And Red Deer certainly being no exception, particularly because of our positioning on the QV2 corridor. Historically, Red Deer has not received the same amount of shelter funding that other communities and regional hub centers in Alberta have. And we recognize that because there was no provincial plan for shelter in Red Deer, and there was no provincial or federal plan in terms of housing, that we needed to come up with a local solution so that we could make asks of the federal and provincial government that were designed and made in Red Deer solutions to those challenges. We do have some Band-Aid solutions, and council was very clear. So for example, one of our local charities closed their daytime warming center. And council at that time said, It's not a direct municipal mandate, but our community expects us to have an ethical response in caring for the vulnerable. But we also need a solution while we work at addressing the systemic challenges. And so our council took a two-pronged approach. One, as we said, in the interim, we will approve daytime warming to protect the vulnerable, particularly during the cold winter months. And we'll work with our organizations, support organizations, to serve the vulnerable. But we also realized that we were done with Band-Aid solutions and that we needed a systematic, locally determined response to submit a request before the provincial and federal orders of government. And that's what we're working on. So right now we've commissioned a shelter study to talk about what do we need for shelter space to ensure there's adequate shelter in the community, and also to make sure that the support services are available and that they're not necessarily scattered throughout the community. Right now there's gaps in services. There's great organizations that provide service, but there's still gaps in service. And so we are working with our community to develop a model in terms of shelter space and bringing integration to some of those services so that they're not necessarily scattered throughout the community. On the housing front, we actually are working on an integrated housing plan as well, recognizing that our old model of affordable housing no longer meets the needs of a city of 100,000 people. And so we not only have existing affordable housing stock shortage, but in a few years, we fully are aware of the fact that we'll have a substantial more shortage. So we're working with the provincial government and with community partners to develop that plan as well.
And just as an aside to that, is it realistic to think as a government, well, no matter what level, or as a citizen, that the homeless situation will ever be totally eliminated, that there's still going to be people that actually do prefer to be on the street and not socialized or institutionalized?
What you have commented on is actually a very astute point, and it actually picks up on a gap. Previously, the province had adopted 10 years plans to own homelessness, and so Red Deer and other communities adopted plans in compliance with that, with 10-year plans to end homelessness. And that is our goal. Our goal, it still remains to try to end homelessness. But what we recognize, what one of the shortcomings of that provincial philosophy has been, is that as much as we don't ever want to entrench people in shelter, but those plans didn't recognize the need for shelter, because obviously our goal is to move vulnerable citizens throughout up into the housing continuum. But we still need a place to provide for those, because there always likely will be people moving in and out of homelessness and in and out of homelessness. And so I think that was the shortcoming of the previous plan, that we're realizing the consequence of that now, and which is why we're working to address that.
Perfect. Okay, well, this would be a good time to head to the video again, and another question from one of the citizens here in Red Deer.
Sounds great.
So if you had the opportunity to ask Mayor Tara Veer any question, what question would that be?
Yes, I belong to the Norwegian Loftus Society, and we have a house administrator there, and we haven't received all the grants that we usually get, so we can't afford to pay her full-time. We've had to cut her back to part-time, and if she gets a full-time job, we're going to lose her. Now I'm wondering if the city of Red Deer pays for the Red Deer Museum, or part of it, why they don't pay us part of it, because we're an accredited museum.
Okay, well, I'm not an expert in museums. I know where they are, and I know usually what they contain, but as far as what her question is, dealing with who's funding what and their grant money, and I guess like everybody else, they're looking for a little bigger piece of the pie. What's your solution to her question?
So the city has various contractual relationships with different organizations that are part of the park nodes, are part of our cultural recreation and cultural amenities in the community. So great examples of that, where there's more of a formal contractual relationship. Great examples of that are Heritage Ranch, the Museum and Art Gallery, Riverbend, and of course Bower Ponds is one, and of course future plans in different park nodes. Organizations, but then we have another pool of funds that organizations like the Norwegian Left House would be eligible for. And I believe that there's about 100 or to 130 community groups that are eligible for that. And it's called the fee for service. And Council had reviewed that fee for service, recognizing that the community's grown, but the pot for that, for distribution hadn't grown. And so we did add in the previous 2 budgets, we did add operational funds to that. And so organizations like the Left House can apply to that fee for service and receive grant dollars from the municipality. But it is a competitive program, and so that's sometimes where we hear concern from the community, because obviously their financial sustainability is important. So I would encourage, if there's specific questions in terms of the formal relationship, I would encourage your viewer to please send an email to mayor@reddeer.ca, and we're happy to follow up on that specifically, because there may be some specific nuance there that we can certainly look into.
Perfect. Well, our clock is ticking away, and there's so much more that we could probably talk about, and maybe we'll have to save that for another time. But I think we'll have to wrap it up right now, Tara. My thanks to Mayor Tara Veer for joining us today on Upfront, and my thanks to you for watching us. Have a good day.